Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Hassan, and I'm with Dr. Yuval Laor. And Yuval and I have known each other for many years. And actually, I think you correctly pointed out we met at Toronto at the Scientology conference with John Atack, mutual dear friend of ours. And I listened to your presentation on your novel theory about emotion and awe and fervor. I heard you present at the ICSA conference in England, and I watched your longer presentation with John. And I said, Yuval, please share with us. And so you have a very interesting background in biology, evolution, history, philosophy. Give us first an overview of your theory, please.
Okay, so my theory, first of all, it focuses on a concept of fervor, which has been almost entirely neglected. I get books both on cults and on religion, and I look in the back to see if fervor is a concept and in the index, and it almost never is. So that is a central. I wrote my PhD and a master's about the evolution of our capacity for fervor, our capacity for awe experiences, and our capacity to undergo sudden religious conversions.
Okay,
Or
define fervor for those
okay,
listeners.
so fervor, I think is a state, right? So awe is the emotion. Fervor is a psychological state that is, and I think both very similar, but it's also related to the state of what's called being in love, also the state of limerence in the romantic context. But I think you also have it in a parental context. So parent to child love can, once it becomes infatuated enough, it can pass a stage and you get into a psychological state of fervor, which, like being in love, which, I mean, of course, we're more familiar with being in love romantically than we are parentally, because we don't usually use that terminology. But that can last months, or yeah, maybe weeks, but months, years, but usually not more than a few years. And it is a psychological state where you wear rose-colored glasses regarding the object that you have fervor towards. You have a very strong sensitivity to criticism, right? So if you criticize an infatuated parent's child, that parent will not listen to you. And if you, if you criticize a cult member's cult, they're similarly not going to listen to you. So I think that awe is so basically what my thesis is that we started with the usual familiar types of love that a human can have, and that is parent to child, child to parent, sibling love, romantic love, and then you have more abstract extended family members and a family, which can be 100 people. And I think that once we became able to talk, right? Once symbolic language came around, we got a new type of love. We got a new type of feeling of knowing, which is truth, right? So truth as a feeling of knowing, right? Not so. We can have great
You're
truths and
talking
ultimate
about
truth.
emotional
Yeah, yeah.
knowing.
So yeah, the feeling that something is true,
Right.
which is the subjective feeling that something is objective, which I know is a little bit of a mix up between subjectivity and objectivity. But and once this new type of feeling of knowing came about, right? Because you don't have the concept of truth before language, right? Because truth is a match between words and reality. Um, and uh, then a new type of love came about. Now, it's the types of love, they're primarily a form of commitment, right? And a special, and they're a special type of commitment that can be very strong, especially if we think of the parental love. right? So if you look at parental love, which can happen involuntarily, just like a strong awe experience can happen involuntarily. So if someone puts a baby on your doorstep and you find the baby, and it could be that a few days later, you're a changed person. And it could be that that change would stay with you for the rest of your life. And the commitment that can be established in a very short time by the manipulation of a baby. I mean, of course, the baby is not actively manipulating you, but you are manipulated by a psychological mechanism that commits you to the baby.
And I
And
have friends who meet runaway dogs and cats, and they have a
yeah,
similar
sure.
attachment, emotional attachment that happens very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I
Um,
want to just say I realized as I was learning from you how cognitively biased I am in my worldview and how I think about making meaning and understanding people. And
yeah,
I feel like you have enriched my sensitivity about emotional states. And in
yeah.
fact, in my bite model of emotional control, it seems so missing so many key elements of your model that I'm really
But
intrigued to know more about.
yeah, the missing aspect, for example, I've read many accounts of cult involvement, mostly Scientology, probably 60% of them Scientology. And I've seen documentary movies, and almost none of them discuss in Scientology the training routines or the experiences that people have while either doing training routines, which could be staring, at someone for hours on end.
Which
And
I've shown with John are hypnotic
yeah,
processes, in
and
fact.
it can induce hallucinations and stuff like that, and yet people do not mention them. You'll Getting Clear, a documentary about no mentions of the TR or of emotional experiences. My suspicion is that because these are subjective experiences and people want to give you an objective account of what happened, they feel that if they add the subjective elements, that, well, I felt like I was floating and I felt a sense of vastness when I was staring at someone's eyes for 5 hours, but that's subjective. And since I want to be objective, I only want to, only the facts. I'm going to ignore the subjective experiences, but I do think that those subjective experiences can play, which can be emotional experiences, right? So love is also an emotion, right? Love can mean many things, but one of the meanings is an emotion. And I think that if fervor is similar to the state of being in love, awe is similar to the emotion of love. Okay, and religion, or could be cult if it's a bad religion, or um, that would be comparable to a family. So
Hmm.
fervor is to religion like being in love is to family. So it's not necessary. It can happen. It usually happens in the onset of a family, but it also fervor. It doesn't need to. The and what happens, and cults would be comparable to an abusive relationship, right? An abusive family.
Yeah, I want to interrupt if I may and just say,
Sure.
um, in reflecting on my Mooney experience. Well, first of all, my Mooney recruiters, my girlfriend had dumped me and they were flirting with me, and I was attracted to all three of them. I wasn't
Sure.
in love with all three, but I was definitely attracted. With that initial attraction, how does that
Yeah.
fit?
So one way people get into cults is by falling in love with a cult member or with a cult leader,
Right.
right? So that is
Yeah, I was
a
going to get
very
to Moon because I definitely didn't know he was the Messiah for a period of a few months, but the notion of a Messiah was huge. The cult was called the Family, so it was a heavy emphasis on on
Sure.
familiar, we're brothers and sisters together. And then ultimately, I definitely had fervor for the whole 2.5 years, like
Yeah,
all the time. Just
for sure. It could last two and a
turned
half
up
years.
all the way off the dial.
Yeah.
Fervor.
So yeah, and um, the when we think of falling in love, many times we think about it in a very modern context where it's one person falling in love romantically with another person. But historically, it was much more common that you fall in love romantically with another person, and that creates a relationship with a whole family of 100 people, right? Especially if you're historically a woman, you fall in love with a guy, and then you need to accept the authority of his patriarch, right? You join the family,
Right.
and when you join the family, you gain 150 new family members, and many times you never saw your old family again because you have been shipped to a new place. But the falling in love, and in this case this is romantic, but of course it can be parental. um, it establishes a whole lot of relationships at the same time, and I think that um, so strong awe experiences can make you convert. And convert is like, joining a new family. Now, the thing is that weak experiences strengthen your infatuation, maybe even bring it up to the state of fervor, like if there's an emergency,
Hmm.
right? But a strong experience can change everything. And if you look at the comparing that to romantic love, you can say that a weaker experience of the emotion of love that keeps the family strong, and increases the infatuation you have towards your family member that you feel love with. But a sufficiently strong uh, emotional experience of love, that's also how families end or break apart, when one member falls in love with the neighbor, with the mailman. And so we see here that the all experiences, they can have very opposite effects, but that's also like love experiences. They can be how family starts, but it can be how families break apart. So the but the awe and the emotion of love, that's only necessary at the early stages. I think in many cults, what happens is that um, you have a conversion experience at the end of which you're in the state of fervor, and that gives you a window of a year, 2, 3 years of the person. Um, the state of fervor does the work for the cult. But once that state of fervor goes down, once it becomes sober belief, just like you don't want to be infatuated with your spouse for too long. I mean, at the end, it settles to real love, which is because limerence, being in love, is with a construct. It's not with reality. Many times, once the infatuation, the state of fervor, the state of being in love goes down, then you see that actually this is not what I expect. This is not what I thought I'm buying into. And there's, and I don't want to speak badly of love, right? Love
Yeah,
gets
but
enough
people create
positive.
a fantasy construct. They live in their fantasy of it until
Yeah,
reality chips away at it. And it's like,
yeah. So cults or abusive relationship have that stage of fervor or of limerence, and that gives them enough time to isolate you and engulf you, and to establish the paranoia, or establish the phobias, right? So that is enough time for the cult, if the cult knows what it's doing, or if the abusive partner knows what it's doing in a macabre way. Then you can end up with the fervor going away, but you're stuck in there because now you're isolated, you're engulfed, you burned all the bridges outside, you're such a true believer. And many times you're too exhausted to think straight, you're kept. So some cults try to keep you in a state of fervor forever, but that's hard. Some cults just use the fervor stage to isolate you, engulf you, and then you're stuck because you're stuck.
So I know you're familiar with my work, and I talk about a dual identity kind of model, like the old Steve Hassan, the Mooney Steve
Yeah.
Hassan, and getting out. How does that fit in your
So first of
conceptualization?
all, the transfer when you fall in love with a baby, especially if you're not previously a parent, um, that needs to change you, and that does change you. I mean, people, your life changes. This is a time you can change all your habits when you have a new baby. Your sleep patterns change. What you think is important changes. What you think the purpose is changes. um, Everything changes, and so in a way, you can say there's a parental identity that is sort of forced onto you once you become a parent. And a lot of people talk about that. My friend, since he had a kid, I don't see him anymore. He's not the same person. It's um, so we have this, and again, this is cults or the psychology of awe and fervor taking advantage of a mechanism that is there to for the purpose of parental psychology, right? To create this new identity, to allow you to change your life suddenly, to allow you to break up with your parents if your parents don't approve of the child, or right. So the transformation can be extreme with parents, and it's not surprising that we'll see that as well with cults. But one of the thing I think that happens when people join a cult is that uh, so you have the conversion experience, but that establishes a child to parent relationship with the cult leader or leadership. But at the same time, it creates a parent to child relationship with the cult, with the group. So the person who joins, they might see the cult leader as a parent that they can depend on, but they the type of relationship they have to the group, the type of giving that you see cult members give to the group, is not the type that children give to parents. It's the type that parents give to children.
That's
That
interesting.
and which is a lot more total, right? And I think that when we see it in parents, right, if we have a story about a parent whose child is, Adolf Hitler or Charles Manson, and that child abuses the parents, steals their money, makes them lie, makes them break the law, makes them right. So the parents are they're terrorized by this demon child, and yet as a society, we say, that's parental love. Of course, parents will give to a child that abuses them. Parents will not see the faults of their child, no matter even if it's a horrible child, and those parents would be devastated if that child leaves them, right?
Yeah,
Or
I'm
if
not
he
sure
passes
parents
away.
wouldn't see the faults of the child or think that they're
Yeah,
fabulous, but they will still love them anyway. At
yeah,
least a lot of
and
parents.
they will rationalize it in one way or another.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they'll grow out of the bad behavior, and
Yeah,
sometimes people
or
do.
it's not as bad as people say, or it's a phase, or it's just the child has a bad apple friend that is influencing them. But I think that that's similar to the way cult members behave, where they they rationalize the faults of the group. Of course, they see the faults of the group, but they rationalize it. They have the sensitivity to criticism. They give all their money. The group steals from them. The group abuses them. And yet they're devastated when the group kicks them out or if the group falls apart. Um, and I think that society needs to feel towards the ex-member the same as they should feel about the parent of a child that a monster child that we need to
I
forgive
didn't
them.
follow
It's
that. I didn't
so
follow that, Yuval. People should feel the same way towards
so
an ex-member.
yeah. So an ex-member the regularly people in society say they're gullible,
Oh, blame
they're
the victim, you
they'll
mean?
blame the victim. They don't understand, like, how stupid could you be? And yet a parent whose child abuses them and steal their money and is Adolf Hitler or is Charles Manson, they're going to say, they're not going to say, well, how gullible he was to still love his child, how gullible he was to give
Right.
money to someone who's a criminal. We're not going to say that that was just stupid. What, couldn't you see that your child? We're going to say, we understand that the psychological state that that person was a parental psychological state, and as a parent, that's how parents behave.
So,
um,
Yuval, from an evolutionary
mhm.
psychology point of view, am I understanding that you're saying it's kind of like hardwired into us?
So the first of all, when you say evolutionary psychology, that means two very, very different things. One of them is just a field in evolution, which is just the evolution of psychological and also sociological traits. But there is evolutionary psychology, which with a big E and a big P, which is a specific theory, which I think is completely misguided and is
Okay,
giving the field a horrible name, and I think is very faulty theory. So
good.
I I don't and that's Cosmides and Tubi 92 evolutionary psychology, but I'm not there.
Good.
Uh, Regarding hardwired, I think that there are people who aren't capable. So if you talk about parental love, which I think is the most fundamental one, right? Um, uh, it's the one that's most, as you would say, hardwired, right?
Well, that's where
Uh,
the attachment forms between parent and child. If the
yeah,
child is getting the proper attention, security.
yeah, and it's very different from the child point of view and from the parent point of view,
Uh-huh.
and also the child. It right when a teenager doesn't love his parents the way a 5-year-old loves his parents, right?
Right.
So that you could say that's avoidant attachment, and that's
Well, that we call
dependent
that
attachment.
adolescence, actually.
Yeah, yeah, but
And I
it's
hear
you still
adolescence
love your
goes to.
parents. You're just happy they're not there. And I think that there are people who have that relationship to their cult leaders, that they believe in them, but when the cult leader is out of the compound for a while, you're happy, you can relax more, you know.
Mhm.
So, but that of course depends on what is going on. So um, to say that it's hardwired, I think that first of all, there are people who are incapable of it. It's certain types of sociopaths or psychopaths that they can't even love a child. You know,
Uh-huh.
there are a lot of people who do not become romantically limerent, apparently, uh, in the literature. So there are people who or that it doesn't happen to them, or that it's very difficult for them to fall in love romantically and to be infatuated romantically. So it could be that there are also people who are incapable of getting. I call it attachment to belief identity. That's the current term in my working and in the book I'm working on. Um, and it's a belief identity because it's um, well, it needs to be an identity, but that's like a family identity, which we have in animals, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it seems in animals that live in groups of, but the to say that it's hardwired, there's so many. I think that there are elements that are hardwired, but there's so many parameters that
Like
are culturally,
oxytocin is what came to my mind, the trust hormone that
yeah,
often gets
and
elicited and transmitted. And
yeah.
that's not
So
conscious, it's not cognitive, it's
yeah, and it plays
biological.
a big role. Of course, oxytocin initially was, they say, was the love hormone and stuff like that. But then they say, well, actually, it also makes you hostile to other people, but that's also love, right? Because love can make you extremely critical of people who are threatening your child, right? I mean, you can have the mother grizzly kind of
I hadn't
effect
heard that
of love, which is
oxytocin has that effect too. It's
yeah,
fascinating. We have a
yeah,
limited amount of time. Can I push you a little bit and ask you to talk about
sure,
charisma and how
yeah.
people have
So
awe to celebrities and
yeah, so first of all, I'll talk about what induces awe, because if we look at the emotion of love, we see that what triggers parental emotion of love and what triggers romantic emotion of love are very, very different things,
hmm
right? And so it makes sense that when we got this new type, new member in the love community, it would also be triggered by something different. So it shouldn't surprise us that what triggers awe is not like anything that triggers parental love or romantic love, even
okay.
though they can also trigger both. But that what it seems like triggers awe is things that are judged to be sufficiently anomalous.
Hmm.
Now, things that are judged to be sufficiently anomalous, that can be, so for example, things that are interpreted as being miraculous would trigger awe. Things that are, unusual somatic experiences, many times it's feelings of vastness. Um, and vastness can trigger awe, but it's also a symptom that comes with awe. But one of the main things that triggers awe is celebrities. Now, who is a celebrity depends on who you think a celebrity is, right? And there's a lot of people that told me, oh, if I see a celebrity, it's not going to trigger awe in me. But they're probably thinking about someone that society thinks is a celebrity, but they don't, right? So if they say, I don't like Justin Bieber, uh, but many times people are surprised at how much awe they felt. So Mick Jagger walked into the restaurant, and I didn't think I'm going to feel awe when I'm going to see Mick Jagger, but boy, I felt it. And or a politician, and many times it's also emotional contagion. So everybody around you feels awe, and then you catch it from them. You think it's a celebrity.
Yeah, I was
But
sitting in a restaurant and Clint Eastwood walked by my table, looked me in the eye, and said hello. And I was like, that was Clint Eastwood. Oh my God. I've seen
yeah,
him
yeah,
in 400 movies. It was
yeah,
weird.
yeah. It's yeah, it's I'm sure it's weird, but it's also why politicians shake hands. It's why incumbent politicians have such a big advantage over challengers, because when a senator shakes someone's hand, that person might feel awe, and that creates a commitment, that creates a sensitivity to criticism, that creates all those things that that you shouldn't have with a politician.
Right.
Um, while when a challenger shakes your hand, it might not feel the same. So
Interesting. And of course, politicians sometimes before COVID would kiss babies.
yeah, and Hitler, which also, of course, uh,
A
uh,
few people looked up to him and thought,
but
aw.
people say that when he would come close, to everybody would be cheering, right? There'll be a crowd of cheering people, and everybody would be very loud. But once he got close enough, there'll be a circle of about 10-meter radius or 30 feet where people would be silent, which is also weird, right? So that's also anomalous. And so this anomaly makes you feel awe because you judge it to be anomalous. So, but of course, what you judge to be anomalous depends on what you think is normal, right? So I
I
can see a
guess.
double rainbow and not care about it. Someone else can think that it's a miracle. Um,
I
but
gotta say, when I scuba dive is when I feel incredible awe.
yeah, well, it's the vastness.
It's the
Uh,
vastness. It is
and
just
it's also the vestibular sense. So many times awe have a vestibular component. So vestibular sense is about balance and motion.
so it's a part of the brain.
It's a sensory system that tells you if you're floating, if you're heavy, if you're out of balance. And
Mhm.
many times when you have awe experiences, you feel like you're lighter, you feel like you're floating. Many times people use that kind of metaphor. But when you're actually floating in the ocean, right? And your vestibular sense feels like you're
Right.
floating, that causes awe. So the vestibular sense both triggers awe and is triggered by awe. But
Fascinating.
so when it comes to charisma, I think that charisma is very similar to the celebrity, right? So the celebrity is not something that's inherent in the celebrity. The celebrity is something that's part of the brains of the people that think of that person as celebrity, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of celebrities people meet and they're not dressed up and they're like any other person.
Yeah, or
Period.
it's they're just like us in
Yep.
many ways, but they can induce spontaneous awe in strangers,
Yeah.
which messes them up as well. And I think that to study awe, and there are a lot of awe studies. Some of them I'm somewhat don't agree with them completely, but I think that it's very good that there's research into it. But one of the sources of awe that I think that is most interesting to study, and where you can, because it's sometimes unethical to induce awe in people, right? There's the I think it's called the Good Friday experiment, where they gave people LSD and sent them to church, right? And some of them became religious.
Uh-huh.
But that was in the 60s, but before it was outlawed. So today we can't really study awe like that. So we do vastness, we do stories that induce awe, but it's it's many times it's too narrow and it's not intense enough of awe. So, for example, there's a book Awestruck, which is fine, but I think that there's many problems with it. But they talk about how you when you induce awe in people, it makes them more curious. And it in general, it presents awe as just a very positive emotion to have. Now, I know that when you have a sufficiently strong awe experience, for example, when someone joins a cult, let's say you join a Bible-based cult, you might be a lot more curious about what's in the Bible now, but you're a lot less curious about whether or not the Quran is, you know.
Right.
So it shifts your curiosity. But just to say that it increases your curiosity, well, I don't think that that's. I think
Right.
it
It might
channels it.
narrow your attention, in fact.
Yeah, and it depends on the settings, right, and the context and the expectations. But um, awe, I also, it's presented as always positive, and I think it is healthy a thing to do. And I think that if you know that it's a subjective experience, and and you swim in the ocean and you see a whale and you have an overwhelming awe experience, that might affect you, but that awe is not used to manipulate you.
Right. There's no hidden agenda to
Yeah,
take you step by step into the
yeah,
closed system.
but awe is dangerous. I think it's very positive on its own, but it's dangerous. And just like also falling in love, right? Both parentally. Now, babies are fine, are good agenda, but there's a joke. Why is divorce so expensive?
Why?
Because it's worth the money.
Because it's worth the money. That's funny.
It's funny, but it's funny because it attests to the fact that sometimes with limerence, with love, you make big mistakes. So
Yes.
society presents love as a positive thing, but someone who, because of infatuated love, was abused by an abusive partner, it wasn't a positive.
Yeah, I just had a flash on something you could sell as a pre-marriage toolkit on emotional states of love and limerence and
Yeah,
awe and and how to
but
think too.
that's yeah, but one of the things about those psychological states, fervor or being in love, is that they make you not they make you not value that. In that psychological state, you will not do the test. You will not, I mean, so if it's
Sounds like
sufficient.
neuroscience. It sounds like something is shifting in the way
Yeah,
that.
but I think that to study it, we need to look at what happens to parents after they adopt a child or give birth to a child. That with birth, it's more complex because you
Are
got.
you aware of anyone studying neuroscientifically these states?
Not particularly. I mean, I've seen some studies with the oxytocin and those, but none that channel it to and compare it to the psychology of cult recruitment. So, if awe is similar to love, and the family in this context, right? So the religion is to a family, the abusive relationship is to the cult, right?
Right.
And when people say that, cults are just, religion plus time, that's like saying, that a loving relationship is an abusive relationship plus time. So,
Yeah.
it just doesn't, it
No, that
doesn't, I mean,
doesn't
it
work.
can happen, but to say that an abusive relationship where there is love, right? There is the psychology of love. There might be a state of being in love. That might be what's keeping the situation going. And not just that, we have a similar dynamics with what's called disorganized attachment or trauma bonding, where both in the abusive relationship and in the cult, the the regular behaviorist old-timey way to think about it is that the worse the abuse, the more likely the person is going to say, fuck it, I'm out of here. Sorry about
Yeah.
the, the F-bomb. But in fact, we see that the worse the abuse, sometimes the worse the abuse, the less likely people would leave.
Yep.
And we see that in both. And I think that is a very um, it's very harmful for people to assume the opposite, that the abuse wasn't that bad if you stayed. No, I stayed because the abuse was that bad. It's one of the things that prevents people from understanding both abused family members and cult members.
So let me push you a little bit and say, how does your model help us understand ethical influence, unethical influence, and the whole issue of how people are recruited deceptively into cults and how to help them leave?
So I think that what I'm discussing is one of the central tools. Now, you can get someone into a cult probably without this tool, I assume. But you can also get someone into a relationship where there is no love, right? If you bribe them, whatever. But I think that what we see here is a very, very potent tool of, in this case, manipulation. And I think that sometimes it's a good thing, right? So when a baby manipulates you to change your life, that's a good thing. And sometimes you can join through a strong awe experience, you can get into a state of fervor towards a group that's a positive group. If you joined the French resistance because of, you had trauma and the Nazis came, and now you are a fervent towards, but it's a good thing that you have fervor towards. So the
Uh
fact
huh.
that you have irrational sensitivity to criticism, the fact that you don't see the flaws in the French resistance, it's still not bad because it's a good cause.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying that using awe to influence people is always negative. It's just that it's always the notion that there is actual consent is challenged. Now, the fact that you, this type of psychological manipulation was used, and sometimes it's used not knowingly, right? But it's I think that if people were educated about it, if people understood it, if people could see it in real time, if people could say, oh my God, I'm having I came to this cult, and now I meditated, and now I'm feeling vastness, and feeling I'm flowing, and the leader did a miracle that I was just overwhelmed with. That if somewhere also in the back of their mind was, yeah, but that is, you know, an awe experience that would create an irrational commitment that I need to, in addition to making the decision based on awe, I need to also make the decision again when I'm not in this mindset.
So that's a
And
very big point that you just made. So, for example, the cult leader in India, Sai Baba, used to do sleight of hand tricks and manifest Rolex watches out of thin air with serial numbers, etc. But it would induce awe in people because they
yeah,
thought he was God and he was materializing. But
and
they were basically misattributing
mhm,
what was being told to
yeah,
them with tricks like magic
well,
tricks.
that's one of the nature of awe is because it induces a feeling of knowing, and those manipulate us, is that people do not notice that there is many times no connection between the miracle and the conclusion that the miracle. And that could be in the biblical miracles where someone walking on the water could prove that aliens have landed, that we live in the matrix. It could prove that Buddhism is correct, right? It doesn't, but people who experience it, because the emotional experience is so overwhelming, they would say, I saw the Son of God. Or actually in the Bible, they think they see a ghost, and then Jesus comes to the boat and tells them, no, the miracle doesn't prove that ghosts exist. It's just me, Jesus. But
Right.
um,
But I want to add in that through my knowledge of hypnosis, like when I was in the Mooney cult and the leader, not Moon, but the sub leader that was in the room was telling us to visualize being at the feet of the cross of Jesus and the blood dripping down on us, it became so vivid. Our imagination was so engaged that it wasn't a story. We were there.
yeah,
That
and
brought up all those feelings.
not
That
just there, but it's sufficiently anomalous. This is not something you experience every day. I mean,
correct.
unless you're a certain type of epileptic, this would be a very rare type of an experience that you have. And as such, it could induce awe just by how unusual it is. But I think that with education, with understanding, especially young enough, because those experiences, just like falling in love romantically, happens to you, or it happened to me like twice a day when I was 15 years old. All experiences are extremely common when you're 15. So that's hopefully education can even reach you before that. But if you can change the experience from the awe that this means that the world has changed, this is really real. This is not ordinary real. This is really real.
Mhm.
Um, and interpreting it as if you went to a magic show. Now, when you go to a magic show, you see something that you can't explain. It blows your mind, but it doesn't mean anything. So it turns it from like a genuinely terrifying experience to a horror movie terrifying experience. Now,
Right.
go to see a horror movie, you can be terrified,
Yep.
but it's okay.
It's a frame that it's not.
Exactly. So you can keep the emotion boxed within this context. And if you can, and when you go to a magic show, you can have the very strong awe experience and your mind is blown, or you go to a concert and they're playing Beethoven and now you're feeling like you're connecting with the universe, right? Or whatever.
Or Eric
Um,
Clapton.
or yeah. So that's impressive anomalies, right? So these are not miracles or celebrities, but these are impressive anomalies. Um, so if you can rearrange the awe experience to, instead of now my life has changed, to now I'm going home and I don't have no idea how Sai Baba did that. I want to know, I might be curious as to how he did the magic, how he knew something that
Or
he should know.
but you have to challenge the ideology that he's God. That deals about the social contagion,
Yeah, yeah,
aspect of
of
it as
course, yeah,
well.
and it's difficult, but I think that if you come to the experience understanding how awe manipulates people and how awe is being induced in you in a manipulative way, and you can feel the awe but be able to frame it, and you end up with an experience just like because going to a horror movie, that's not going to change your life. A terrifying experience where you thought the shark really was going to eat you, that can cause PTSD. That can really affect you a lot. It can induce phobias. It can, I mean, movies can as well, but
Yeah.
um
But I want to
the
come back to something you said at the beginning, which is the Scientology TRs. People regularly say it was those experiences that made them sign on to
yeah,
believe that Scientology had all these answers that were going to save the
and
planet.
yeah, and so the term for the awe experience that Scientology has is a win, right? And so when someone says, I've been in Scientology 20 years, and all you did was take all my money and break my family, and but they'll say, well, yeah, but what about the wins? Didn't you have wins? Now, many times the wins, right? So you staring at someone else's eyes for hours on end, and you hallucinate, and you have an out of body experience, and you feel like you're floating, and
Which
this was
Scientology says is good, an
oh
exteriorization. It's a very high emotional state, they say.
uh, so um, when you have that experience, and immediately after Scientology asks you, would you like, you need to confirm that it was Scientology that brought you the win, as they call it, that you want other, you write the success story. Um, you get applause from a crowd, a standing ovation, if you had a very strong, so they really build it up, but they try to make you associate the awe experience with Scientology
Yeah,
only.
they
Yeah.
did it, not you. You didn't
But
have.
for some people, the awe experience proves for them beyond a doubt that the technology works. Sometimes they think that it proves that everything Hubbard ever said works. Sometimes it proves that Hubbard is, mankind's best friend, as they call him. But sometimes it they didn't prove to them that the church was good. So when the church abuses them enough and they leave, they might say, well, it was proven to me beyond a shadow of a doubt, right, that the technology works, because I experienced it myself, which is also why when someone, let's say that Scientologist, let's say that their parents tell them, yeah, well, we read online that Scientology is all bullshit and that it doesn't work. They say that's gaslighting. I experienced with my own senses.
And Mormons have a burning in the bosom that proves that it's the
So
right.
for you to tell me that it doesn't work, that's gaslighting. They
Mhm.
see it as gaslighting. Of course, it's not gaslighting, because gaslighting is
Right.
attempt to make you think that it's purposeful, but they think it's purposeful, and for them, they experience it themselves. So there are people who have left Scientology 20 years afterwards. They still think that the church is corrupt and horrible. Maybe the current leader, Miscavige, is corrupt, but they still think that the technology works
Yeah, the
because that
tech.
experience,
Yeah.
so I think that mindset is sort of like um, a parent whose child joins an evil cult, and they say, well, the child is good, and that's based on their experience they had when the child was born or when they adopted the child, and that stays with them 50 years later, but the child is corrupt now, so they still love the child, right? They still have a commitment to Scientology technology that survived because that was based on the initial conversion experience.
Yep.
But they now think that it's all corrupt, just like their child was corrupted by the cult, right?
Right.
So those people, they have left the cult. But I think that without understanding the how our experience makes you feel things are really real, many people can still believe that the technology works, or that the group works, or that even though we know that it's not good, because I've been there, it's not good,
Right.
but it still has some truth to it, because the power of the initial experience was so strong that that commitment stayed with you. But I think that understanding the nature of awe can help people say, no, actually, that wasn't even true either.
Yeah, and I would
Even
add knowing that other people in other cults, not the one that you're currently in or had been involved with, but seeing the patterns and the
yeah,
parallels with
sure,
others gives a perspective
exactly.
on things that
Yeah.
can be helpful.
But that experiences are not an argument, but for humans, a certain type of experience can be the ultimate argument. That after that, no argument would make you change. There are people who say, listen, I had an experience on a TR. Nothing your mouth would say would make me doubt what I experienced with my own senses.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
true for them. You know?
Yep. I have on rare occasions been challenged to duplicate occult technique
Mhm,
hypnotically, and the
mhm,
people experienced it and they went, "All right, that's it. I'm out. I'm done."
mhm.
Like I did
Yeah.
with a young man who was in Zen Master Rama's cult, and in that cult, the leader would have people play a meditation tape, but it was really a hypnosis tape, several times a day. And he said, when you're ready to see your true teacher, you'll see a golden light coming from your true teacher. And darn, don't you hear other senior members say, "Oh, I saw the golden light when Rama," and then you have that experience. And so with this
It's
young
close to
man,
you
I
because
said,
it's
you
a,
know, there are alternative explanations to that experience. And he said, what? I said, hypnosis. You can hallucinate kinesthetically, visually, auditorily. He said, prove it. And it was first time anyone put that to me like that. And I didn't want to do hypnosis with him, but I was trying to not, get out of the challenge either.
Mhm.
So I just said the following, and I didn't use a hypnotic tone of voice or anything. I just said, I want you to meditate like Rama taught you to meditate. So he closed his eyes, and I said, I want you to go deeper than you've ever gone before. And then I said, and I don't want you to open your eyes until you're fully ready to see an even brighter light coming from me. So I did
Mhm.
a double bind so that he would have to keep his eyes closed for the rest of his life or see the bright light. So he saw the bright light. He's like, wow, that's it. I'm out. I'm done.
Yeah. And so I think also and I think that if you talk to cult members and the awe experience at the heart of their belief, I think that if you can, dismantle that landmine, if you can break apart that that is, I think, so much more promising as a something that has a chance to get them to change their
Yeah,
mind. Because
identifying it. Like when did you
so
have that moment where you felt like you wanted to commit
and
your
so
life?
in that sense, you're not arguing with the ideology, you're arguing about the ideology and about the emotional experience that proved the ideology to you. And
Right.
first of all, that's already, you're not arguing with the thing, you're talking about it,
Right.
right? And so as you're talking about it, it's, and you can talk with the believer about it, and it's not an attack or it can be interpreted as not being attacking. Um, but the if you can make them doubt that the experience is an argument, I think that has can be a lot more promising. And I think that the fact that almost all cult accounts ignore subjective experience, ignore awe experience, ignore what I felt when I stared at someone else for 5 hours straight, or other, or what happens after you're sleep deprived for enough time, right? Um, the fact that people ignore the subjective I think is a detriment to the discourse of trying to get people out. I think that the main thing you need to talk about is the subjective experience, which had an objective effect on it. You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think there must be a way that we can figure out on how to study this scientifically to
But
show.
if to if I think that if you can bring fans of a celebrity and then have that celebrity walk into the room, right? So you're an experimenter. You have, Paul McCartney on hand. You have, Stevie Wonder. You have some mega celebrity, and you bring fans of them, and then you have them follow questionnaire. You bring the celebrity in. That can induce a sufficiently strong awe experience to have really, really important effect, but it's not unethical. I think
Right.
there are other ways to make them think that there's a miracle that
Well, I would start with a control of somebody walking in the room that's a
yeah,
nobody,
yeah,
have a baseline, then have the celebrity show
yeah.
there's a really different brain
And then
reaction.
if you can bring Ringo Starr first and then Paul McCartney, see if there's a difference.
Some people love Ringo. Come on.
Yeah, yeah. But the um I think that I mean, you need a celebrity to do those experiments,
Yeah,
but I
but
think
on another
that
hand,
it's
can't you do like an Oculus, a virtual reality thing, and potentially study someone's
yeah,
reactions?
but I think that then it's going to be like studying fear at a movie theater, and it's not going to
Ah,
be like studying fear in the jungle.
good point.
And but if the person steps into the room, right? Because if the person knows that the awe experience is, okay, so in the virtual reality, I saw a celebrity,
Got
or,
it.
or I was given a vastness to think that, and as I said, the awe experience is just like love experience. They have a threshold effect that you can study, people that love a kitten, but unless you have it a very strong awe experience, you're not going to have falling in love at first sight in the lab. But if you can bring in a celebrity that will absolutely create a huge awe experience, and I know someone, and he's a minor celebrity. He's a musician and he's got a few fans, but I think that celebrities could, if they could talk to fans, and I think that if a celebrity talks to a fan, asks the fan, so how do you want to change your life? And the fan says, I want to stop smoking. And the celebrity that is blowing this person's mind says, all right, Mick Jagger is telling you to stop smoking, right? And it's something that the person wanted. I think there's a very big chance that it's going to be very successful, that a person can
That's
change their
interesting.
life,
That taps also into
use
the
the awe experience.
authority studies of
Mhm.
believing
Yeah,
somebody is, power.
exactly. Good. So this is just a celebrity induced experience. When it comes to the authority, that's also celebrity induced. Now, when I say celebrity induced awe experience, that can also be a hallucination that I felt that God was with me in the room, and that's a celebrity induced experience. I was in the presence, and God is, of course, the ultimate celebrity. Um, but I think that if you're a mega celebrity and you would like as a hobby to improve people's lives once a day, you can have the person that comes sign the autograph with tears coming down their face, and you can in 20 seconds really improve that person's life because they're in a psychological state that makes them malleable.
Okay, if you're a celebrity watching this, here's the thing. You ask them what change they want to make, and then you direct them to make the change, is what you're saying, because
Yes,
they're awe a state.
their awe is likely to put them in a psychological malleable state in which that they will be able to change their life.
Great. So as we wrap up, thank you
Yes.
so much. I wonder if there's any last thoughts you want to add for our listeners. We're gonna
Um,
give links to your longer presentation with your
sure.
your
Yeah.
animations that are
Mhm.
really well done.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
And if someone wants to read a draft of my book, They can email me and I'll email them a draft. It's not going to be as good as it's going to be at the end, but it's about 70% done. So
That's so exciting. So is this going to be an academic volume or a
I,
public?
I hope to make it on the popular end.
So
Yeah.
you need good stories to illustrate your points.
Yes.
Okay. Go forth and make it happen. Thank you so much, Yuval.
Thank you.